2012. This is Civil Discourse Now. I'm co-host Mark Small, an Indianapolis attorney. Co-host Paul Ogden, also an Indianapolis attorney. Our guests are Nicolas Martin, longtime libertarian with a little L. Also, he is the devoted serf to his 9-year-old daughter. And Jeff Cox, jrcoxlawllc.com. We are coming to you from Big Hat Books. Big Hat Books is in Broad Ripple, north side of Indianapolis, 65th and Cornell Avenue. One of the books that's got going right now is And So It Goes, biography of Kurt Vonnegut Jr. Also, it has Crime Pays, a novel by me about a Ponzi scheme, fictionalized account of Ponzi scheme that occurred in Kokomo, mid-north Indiana in the 1960s and beginning of the 1970s. We're talking today about Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission and an abhorrent Supreme Court decision, I believe.
Abhorrent or boring?
Abhorrent.
I think there's an H in there.
There is. A-B-H-O-O-H-O-R-R-E-N-G. It's silent.
It's only silent in Italian.
Abhorrent?
It's abhorrent.
Okay, well, anyways.
Or a brilliant defense of American liberty, if you take the libertarian one.
And Nicolas, you were just commenting at the end of the last segment, and we had to cut you off to be able to stop.
Okay. If we refer, which seems to be the incessant desire to do, to large corporations who pour money in, you talk about $100 million instead of talking about little community organizations and the Y and things like that, or the March of Dimes, the organizations that are corporations that qualify under Citizens United. Large corporations have a lot to gain and lose through elections because the government interferes enormously in the economic activity of the country and has immense power, has basically life and death power over the existence of corporations. And so large corporations and medium corporations have a great deal of incentive to spend money to support candidates who think will do them the least harm. We can put an end to a lot of this by getting government out of the business of regulating those economic activities in which it has no proper business.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, they're not prohibited from speaking. They have to set up political action committees and proceed through that, funding those. There are reporting requirements associated with that. But part of I believe the minority opinion in Citizens United said that, well, they can still speak. They just have to go through a political action committee as set up by the Congress.
And in going to the idea of not putting restrictions on corporations, I say if we're going to do that, let's return to the 1880s when we didn't have restrictions on corporations. Even as late as the 1960s, there were so few restrictions on corporations, like in the environment, that the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland caught fire.
Cuyahoga.
I thought it was just Cuyahoga.
No, it's Cuyahoga. And the river in Chicago, the Chicago River caught fire too, but no one seems to remember that one.
Yeah, but with not having restrictions and oversight on these corporations, you have like the 2007-2008 bank crisis.
No, but there are proper ways of protecting. The Cuyahoga River was a problem of because it was the tragedy of the commons. It was not private property. There was no protection for it. It's government property, and government property always goes to hell. Government property is not maintained. The National Park Service does a miserable job of protecting the parks, and so you can track down almost any instance of corporate malfeasance or abuse of the environment or abuse of citizens as having some relationship to the lack of private property and to the collaboration of corporations with government officials.
And for the record, they have really cleaned up the Cuyahoga River now in Cleveland. It's one of the cleanest rivers in the country. They've really taken that seriously in Cleveland. Not so sure about Chicago.
Well, but and they haven't done very much about the football or baseball teams in Cleveland. But in terms of it, you're saying that is a public waterway. That is a public waterway, and look at how awful the government has done in terms of the parks. Mm-hmm. That's a public waterway into which industries have dumped
Right.
And so the industries have not been regulated, and you need to regulate those industries.
They wouldn't be dumping it there if it were privately owned property, because the owner of the property would defend against that.
I tend to disagree. What if the corporation bought the river, and then they could dump everything in it legally?
If they bought the entire river and all of the impacts downstream from it, unlikely. How's that going to happen?
Well, no, you just said if the river was privately owned, then the owners could defend it. But what if the corporation either bought the river for itself or sought the owner's permission and got it to dump all this sludge in the river? I don't think that's okay.
No, it wouldn't be okay. But the people who are impacted by that, they can't buy the entire river. The people who are impacted by that downstream would have property rights, and their property rights would be
And what if they sold? And what if they sold those property rights?
Well, if every single person in a given area agrees to allow their property to be damaged, and it only damages their property, there is no problem.
Well, there is a problem, because what about the generations to come? Because this person right now sells their property and allows, whatever it is that they're dumping into the stream, something really bad like mercury.
We seem to be spinning out of control here. We're going to talk about the Montana decision.
Well, that's true. We were going
Maybe we should have a show on property rights and pollution.
Well, I don't think we could get. I think a lot of
I'm sorry,
property rights.
I just got a check from a very large corporation. I've decided to change my opinion. I think Citizens United is really great. Now, let's go to the Montana case, okay? Because this kind of segues into that. In the Montana case, the Montana Supreme Court based its decision. I read the majority opinion, and I read both dissents. The majority opinion does not come up with a real good reason why its authority is superior to the Supreme Court of the United States.
How about we explain what the Montana decision is?
Okay. Montana had an initiative. It was a ballot initiative in 1912. The people of Montana voted to restrict a corporation could not donate to a political campaign. That's clearly the law. Now, the reason for that was in the 1880s, 1890s, there were so many minerals, and copper, silver, gold, but a lot of copper, that just a few people had a whole bunch of money. Gosh, like less than 1% of the people had a lot of money. One guy, C.W. Moore, was called one of the Copper Kings. He had banks, and he would foreclose on miners and take their mines and then have the copper. So he decided in 1898 that he wanted to be a United States Senator. So all of a sudden there are a bunch of, because this was before direct election of United States senators. So the legislature would elect a senator. State legislature would elect a United States senator. So suddenly there were a lot of really affluent members of the Montana legislature, and Moore went to the U.S. Senate. The U.S. Senate launched an investigation because they were alarmed about this and unseated him. So he went back to Montana, got the governor of Montana out of the state on a ruse, plied the lieutenant governor, with who knows why, we don't know. Lieutenant governor appoints him to the same seat that he had just vacated. He goes to Washington. The Senate does the same thing, threatens to launch an investigation. He goes back to Montana. Now, these are facts that are not disputed in the record or in the history of Montana. This is an important matter because the case was brought up on summary judgment, which means that there's no question of fact. It's only a question of law. He came back and he basically bought the generals, their whole legislature, and they finally sent him to Washington, and he was saying, well, what are you going to do about it now? Now I'm a United States Senator. Mark Twain wrote of C.W. Moore, he did not belong in the United States Congress. He belonged in a penitentiary. So the people of Montana were so shocked about their government being taken away. People stopped voting. They became very apathetic. What's the point? This corporation's running everything. They finally passed this initiative because of what corporations had done.
Are they the same people of Montana who supposedly were so gullible that they were convinced to vote the way the corporations wanted them to vote before that? Same people, right?
No. They were kind of shunted to the side, and they finally got this initiative through where
Well, how did they do that if they were powerless?
not powerless. They were virtually without power. It was being taken away from them, and they finally rose up. Now,
Well, they could have risen up at any time.
Oh, no, if they had this Supreme Court in existence back then, this Supreme Court would have said, you can't do that.
So
we're a poor corporation.
They did that by a referendum, a public referendum.
An initiative.
Which we don't have in Indiana.
That's right.
Yeah, which we should have, but we don't.
They have in Wisconsin.
The kind of referendum that would make gay marriage illegal.
I understand that.
Yeah,
But they
so
would also,
referendums don't necessarily lead to freedom. They
yeah,
can
but
lead-
it
they
would
can
also
lead
have
to
stopped
tyranny.
it would also have stopped boondoggles like Lucas Oil Stadium.
Well, is it a trade-off? Or if you were a gay male, would you say it's a worthy trade-off? I don't know if it would stop boondoggles. People voted for referendums for football stadiums and other places.
The poll showed here that they wouldn't have.
But I think what you're saying makes it very clear: the people of Montana were not powerless. That the evil corporations did not prevent the people of Montana from, at whatever point they felt it necessary, from asserting their power.
Oh, they could at a certain point, but unfortunately, not until C.W. Moore was in the United States Senate representing the interests of the people of Montana and also affecting United States policy itself. And so
Who elected him? The people of
the Senate.
the general,
Or the
legislature.
the legislature of
Who
Montana.
elected the legislature?
Well,
The legislature.
the people did, but Moore had spent a whole bunch of money. He spent $400,000. It's estimated.
Okay, so people.
Which is like $40 million.
As someone who's investigated public corruption, I spent a good part of my career investigating vote fraud and public corruption. It is very difficult to get corrupt politicians out of power with only the vote, because they find ways to cheat. They find ways to buy off important people who count the votes. It's just because the people have the votes, the right to vote, doesn't mean that they can get corrupt politicians out of power.
Well, but then you look at successfully clean government. Illinois, something like
Wait, what?
65% of the governors in the last 65% of their governors in the last 20 years have not gone to prison.
And do they have good government laws like restrictions on speech and things like that in Illinois, or restrictions on campaign contributions? All these things that are supposed to produce honest politics, do they have those in Illinois?
I don't know the specifics of the statutes of Illinois.
Here's
So
the
I
problem.
was wrong in raising that as a sarcastic point. I apologize.
Liberals and conservatives sell the same thing. You give up your rights, and we're going to give you good, healthy food. We're going to give you good government, clean government. We're going to give you no terror. And it's all crap. You give up your rights, you lose your rights, but you don't get anything for it in return. It's illusory. And so you end up, they come back to you and they ask you to give up more rights because we need more security. It didn't work the first time. We're going to do better. We're going to get cleaner government because we need tougher laws. And it's all a hoax that both the right and the left foist on the American
Except that's the whole concept of any government, is that everyone gives, natural liberty is the law of the jungle. You give up some of your liberty for the security of a government, so you don't have people taking vengeance into their own hands. They have a law.
No, you give the government immense power to do far more harm and kill vast numbers of people. That's what you get.
Is the alternative no government?
The alternative is extremely limited government, and I believe that's where we started, and where we have drifted inexorably away, thanks not in small part to lawyers. Ever since, people divided in decentralized units can do a lot less harm than governments. And when we give power to government, we do it ostensibly to obtain benefits, but in fact, the history shows that governments are the most abusive, the most violent, the most corrupt.
We're out of time on this segment. We'll be right back.